Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'm your host, Greg Martin. You know, those of us who have had those wonderful encounters with some of the more interesting of our sea creatures can really count ourselves as being lucky. Here in the Pacific Northwest, it is oftentimes wonderful to happen across a really friendly wolf eel. And my favorite encounters are, of course, with the giant Pacific octopus. And we had a lovely conversation here a while back with author Cy Montgomery. And I was cruising through the bookstore here the other day, and I wound up coming across a brand new book. At least I think it's brand new. We'll find out. The author is Peter Godfrey-Smith, and the name of the book just captured my imagination. It's called Other Minds. Other Minds, the Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. And I picked a copy up like right away. And does that mean, Peter, that octopus are smarter than me?
Hi, Greg. I don't think so, but they certainly give us all a run for our money.
They definitely do. This is a wonderful read, and I'm just about finished with the book. You talk about some things in here that could be kind of scary to those of us of limited brain capacity.
It's not. I hope not. It's not supposed to be too scary, but I can't help if it is.
We'll talk a little bit about the book itself, Other Minds. I mean, we as divers know that a lot of the sea creatures that we run across, especially the octopus and some of those, the cuttlefish and so forth, they're very, very intelligent. And that's what you take on in this book, right?
Right. I mean, in trying to think in terms of a kind of scale of intelligence, I think that tends to be a bit of a trap. And part of the point of the book is the true otherness of these animals. I think that in many cases it's fruitless to try to kind of give a ranking of intelligence to different animals. Having said that, I think in various reasonable senses, I think that octopuses and some other cephalopods are smart creatures by any reasonable standard. Not as smart as the smartest mammals or I think the smartest birds, again, just sort of working within this slightly oversimplified scalar way of talking for a while. But what they do have is firstly, a profound otherness. They're very different in the way they handle the world and approach the world. And secondly, the evolutionary distance they have from us, the fact that every animal is a cousin in a sense of every other animal on Earth, but they're such distant cousins. The separation is so big that there's special animals for thinking about the mind and its evolution.
You start the book off talking about that, talking about the fact that we all seem to be a part of a tree as well as being part of different branches and so forth. And it's kind of, we all look at our family trees, but I don't think any of us take it quite as far down as you did.
Right, I think it's important to take the tree idea, very serious and quite literally. This was one of the advances in Darwin's Origin of Species in the mid-19th century. So as Darwin says in that book, people had thought in vague and metaphorical terms, mostly metaphorical terms, about the idea that different living things form a kind of a tree-like structure. People had thought that before, but Darwin took the idea literally. So just as if we go back far enough in time, you and I will share a common ancestor, or in fact, many common ancestors. The same thing is true of you and an ant, or you and an octopus, you and an oak tree. If you go back, tracing steps through the past, given the shape of evolutionary change, you will eventually get to an organism that was an ancestor of both you and the ant, or you and the octopus, or you and the oak tree. And that's a profound organizing principle for thinking about evolution. So in biology now, a great deal of effort goes into reconstructing and thinking about the exact shape of the tree of life.
Just an absolutely fascinating thought. Drilling it down that far, it really is. Now, In reading through the book, I mean, it's obvious that you're a diver. I mean, you spend plenty of time in the water, and you discuss Octopus, the location that you've spent some time studying some different octopus in that area. Talk about the significance of that, would you?
Sure. Right. As you say, I do a fair bit of diving, mostly in Australia, in New South Wales, though I go a bit further afield sometimes. I learned to dive originally in Hawaii a long time ago. Great place to learn, and I've been meaning to go back and do some more diving there. First chance I get now. Anyway, Octopus is a site that was discovered by chance by a friend of mine, Matt Lawrence, I guess getting up close to 10 years ago now, when he was doing some exploratory dives on the coast of New South Wales. And what's special about it is the fact that, I mean, as I think you'll probably agree, when you dive and you come across octopuses, you'll quite often see one, you might occasionally see two. Pretty unusual to see three in a small space. And usually if there's three in a small space, there's trouble of one sort or another going on between them. The site that Matt discovered is a site where you'll quite often see a dozen octopuses in quite a small space, really
Wow.
just a few square yards. And as far as I know, it's the only place in the world where you can do that. There's an old report from the 1970s of a now lost site in the Panama area. Martin Moynihan and Arcadio Rodanish wrote about that in some work from back then. But I don't know of any other sites where you can see a dozen octopuses in one place at one time.
I no any place, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, you will see a loner almost every time you dive, but I've never seen more than two at a time. So that has to be something kind of special to see. And you talk about the interaction that there's the bully, and then there's the one that gets picked on, and that's interesting.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of interaction there. It's hard to work out exactly how to think about it. So it's not as if they're friends, I think, in most cases, and I don't think they're hanging out of a kind of gregarious tendency in the way that you would often see in birds and various fish, for example. The picture we have is that it's an area where there's lots of food, but there's a scarcity of den sites. And as a consequence of that, the octopuses have just sort of had to find a way to get along, or at least it's worth trying to get along. So there's lots of sort of low-level aggression. There's also a good deal of tolerance. I mean, octopuses will just sort of sit there alongside each other for long periods. And this is not just one male and lots of females. We're quite sure that there's often multiple males as well as multiple females at the site. As you say, you see a kind of wrestling, and sometimes one individual will attempt to dominate the site, excluding some other octopuses. We suspect probably, in ways we don't understand yet, working out sometimes at some distance which other octopuses are males and excluding them. We see various sorts of signaling. We have a paper in the journal Current Biology from last year about some of the signals that you see, displays during some of the fights and agonistic interactions.
You also discuss not just octopus, but other cephalopods as well, and you talk at length about cuttlefish. And I don't know that I knew that cuttlefish were much more of an intelligent species than your average fish. But then again, I'm not the most intelligent species either. So talk. What brought you to cuttlefish?
Sure. Yeah. Well, what brought me to them was just encountering them in the water. So around Sydney, and this is a great thing it's an easy and great thing for divers in the US to do. Come to Sydney and do some diving, mostly shore diving in many cases, that will get you interacting with giant cuttlefish. In the Manly area, which is where I spend a lot of time, I began to encounter these animals, and they're just extraordinary to come across. Often 2 feet or more long, changing color continually, changing the whole pattern and color of their skin less than a second, and often rather interactive in something like the same way octopuses are. Curious about a diver, peering at them, not running away, not usually being violent or aggressive. Now, on the question of whether they're, what kind of intelligence they have, there's much less known about cuttlefish than there is about octopuses. Octopuses have been studied behaviorally for, really best part of a century now, and intensively for the last 50-odd years. And so, lots of experiments have been done, lots of anecdotes have been collected, and we have a sense of, what kind of learning they can do, their ability to solve problems. There's a good paper came out just a few months ago out of Michael Kuba's lab, his lab now in Japan, where an octopus was able to solve a kind of puzzle box which required a specific sequence of moves. So all that stuff's been done with octopuses. Almost none of it's been done with cuttlefish. So they're very enigmatic. I think of them as animals that do have a lot going on inside. And I think that partly on the basis of that kind of engagement that they display when they interact with a diver, and also the fact that they do have large nervous systems on the same rough scale, large brains on the same rough scale as octopuses. So although a lot less is known also about the behavior of squid, if you look just at brain size, then octopuses and cuttlefish are a little above squid with respect to the proportion of the body that's dedicated to nervous system. So there's at least a similar kind of investment that cuttlefish are making in their nervous system.
It's a fascinating subject, and I'm sure you didn't begin to scratch the subject in this book. Are you thinking about proceeding with a with a follow-up here?
I am actually. I've begun working, pretty slowly on a follow-up. And the follow-up will be, it'll go a little wider with respect to different kinds of animals. So there's hardly even a word in the book, Other Minds, about life on land and the evolution of intelligent life on land. So I will at some point, trace the story forward and start to think about the relations between land and sea, think about the evolution of animals a little bit more similar to us. And also, of course, I'm continuing to collect pictures, collect anecdotes, collect video of these creatures.
Well, again, fascinating topic. And if you're at all interested in the world, the realm of cephalopods, again, the book is called Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. Now, if you're not a diver, don't worry about it. I mean, octopus, they're just fascinating creatures as they are. If you were a diver, obviously, you're going to love this. I would ask one quick question, though, Peter. Is there a takeaway for folks that you want to see when they read the book?
Sure. I think, in some ways it's hard to express the takeaway because there are two messages that I do want a reader to come away with simultaneously, but in some ways they pull in different directions. One is the fact that there's a connectedness in animal life, which is a historical connectedness. We're all part of the same continually evolving evolutionary tree. And there's a kind of cousin-like relationship that we have with all animals. And I think thinking about those continuities between animals is an important thing to do. But it's also the case that within that tree structure, cephalopods and especially octopuses, they have this very special status because they're both very complicated in how they behave and very far from us on the tree. They're not our close cousins in the way that chimps or dolphins or to some extent even birds are. They really are sort of semi-alien in some respects. Now, as I said, I think of those two messages as, in a sense, pulling a little against each other. One is a message about continuity between us and them, and another is a message about discontinuity, or at least distance between us and them. And that is how I think about these animals. I think there's this very unusual combination there.
Be sure and pick up a copy One more time. Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. Peter Godfrey-Smith, the author. And I'm going to be looking, obviously, for the next follow-up to see where you go with that. Peter, thanks for taking a 17-hour time difference here, you in Sydney and me here in the Pacific Northwest, to make this happen. It's a fascinating subject.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure, Greg.
And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. You don't want to miss a single episode. We'll have more people coming on to talk about things like this, like Peter. And please, if you like what you hear, give us that positive review, hit that 5-star rating. I'd love that. And I'd love to hear your comments as well. Email me at podcast@naui.org. And that's it for this episode of NAUI's Dive Team Report. Again, thanks to Peter Godfrey-Smith for talking with us about his book. I'm Greg Martin. Thanks for listening to NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'll see you underwater.